Hello, my name is Katie Byford and I'm going to perform some poems for you today. I'm going to start with a poem called Blush. 1. University is the place, I am told, for sex, and so I set about trying to fall in love. 2. There is a man with black hair and a scrubby beard who cries when I touch him back and tells me not to tell anyone about this. There is a blonde girl with full lips and unfortunately on her period. There is a boy my age with long arms that stay by his side. 3. The year marks the town's first Pride parade. My friends coax me into a Tinder account set to women only. It feels like walking into a butcher's, swathed in that pink blush, all that bloodless flesh and myoglobin, plucked and skinned, draped from ceiling hooks or stacked behind the counter. You're meant to run a lazy finger along the glass and stop on the one you'd like to eat. 4. The long-armed boy and I do not dance well and laugh at each other in equal measure. This is not real. 5. Will I miss my virginity more than I miss home? 6. Concentrate on holding his gaze, his hand, his... 7. I want to be snatched from the shelf before I remember I am not a pickle jar. And this one is called A Poetry Book is Not a Natural History Museum. We sidestep the iguanodon and head straight for the lions. It doesn't smell of anything in here except spectators. Eyes squeak. The hide on this is neat, combed, jaws stretched wide, an old swoon made to look like a growl. Is this how it works? No. They squirm and ache and change. Not once have I seen one stuffed with anything but living stuff. And cabinets are no good, they tend to break the glass. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, and I hope you enjoy this readings of poetry, and have here Katie Byford with me. So hello.
Hello.
Nice, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for recording yourself reading your poems. I really enjoy them. So when I was listening to them, particularly the first one, I was like, it's like a uni experience.
Yeah, I think since I began reading it, many people said it's very similar to my experience, and yeah, hopefully it's relatable.
Was that supposed to be, is that the implicit question if I ask you, is that basically your uni experience in a poem form?
Yeah, I mean, it's one aspect of my uni experience, and it's my first year uni experience, so I was definitely quite wide-eyed, but yeah, I was reading quite a lot of I was beginning to read quite a lot of Sappho at the time, and that kind of fragmentary way of her writing ended up quite fragmentary, but that way of reading poems that were fragmentary was a nice way of attempting to summarize an experience that had so many different layers to it, and thrown into different situations, that suddenly you realize you're in a situation and you think, wow, this is kind of weird, without having to write a whole poem about that one thing, which wasn't that profound an experience, but as one mosaic tile of a bigger picture is kind of interesting. Yeah, so it was an interesting time, definitely. Yeah.
What I love about poetry is, I mean, I'm not really like an expert or anything like that, and there was a time when I used to love poetry a lot, and then I completely stopped loving poetry because it was very hard to understand what actually it meant, and for yourself, even for if you wanted to understand it, how you understand it, not what the poet wanted to say through it. But I love the fact that it is so different, and it's got so many different forms as well. And like your poems, the ones you perform, I've seen them in like a written form. They're not the same at all. And what I love about the poetry is the fact that it can have so many different guises and so many different styles.
Yeah.
And each of the poets got a unique style as well. But you also take the inspiration from the past as well.
Yeah. It's for me, it's really important because it was I did a classics degree, and it so for 3 years of my life, pretty much the only poetry I read was thousands of years old, and it was in a very strict form. And I've been quite resistant to that, because that's how I first, I started reading poetry because I picked up a book of Shakespeare's sonnets, and I thought, oh, this is poetry. Okay, I'll write a sonnet, and it was horrible. And looking back at those poems from when I was very young, I was a bit cringeworthy. So I've been quite resistant of exploring form in like the formal ways of exploring form. So that's, I think, what I'm trying to get back into doing now. But definitely taking classical subjects that are usually explored in in classical poetry in like very rigidly set ways.
Yes.
And then taking them out of that, and taking them out of their time, and kind of bending them and seeing what how they end up, and applying modern expectations to them. I find that really interesting, because often these are subjects that we know, or we know of, or they feel familiar even if we don't really know what the myth is. So yeah, that's something I always find quite interesting. Yeah.
And do you have anything in particular that inspire you? Because it's very hard to ask a poet about the themes of your poetry. It was like, well, what do you mean themes? But do you have themes in your poetry? Is there anything in particular aspects of, I don't know, life that particularly inspires you to write about?
I think it changes. It definitely, I go through phases. So recently I've been writing about, so on the theme of mythology, I've been writing kind of, they're not really versions of myths, but they're kind of explorations of female subjects in mythology in poem form. So that's kind of taken on like this, like, oh my god, there are so many of them now. And so that's sort of something I've been thinking about quite a lot. And I've also been thinking about the quality of memory, especially as it relates to PTSD, because PTSD is it does such weird things, and trauma does such weird things to the way you remember things. So that's been a sort of theme that's been emerging and then developing for a few years now with me, and has kind of gone through being very difficult to write about to then being much easier to write about. So yeah, that's, I think at the moment that's kind of what I'm looking at. But I think generally, obviously, I think especially when I was younger, writing about the experience of being a woman or a girl, and being queer as well, is something that pops up all the time. And just kind of what it is to exist in the world, I guess, which just sounds very like a cheat, but
No, but that's what it is about, isn't it? The poetry is, in a way, whatever you write about is an exploration what sort of what your place in the world is. Because if you were different, you wouldn't write about the same subject, or you would write about it a completely different way.
Exactly.
So in a way, the poetry is exploring who you are in a sort of like a very vague way as well.
Yeah, it's your own little corner of the world, and how you see it. And how it presents itself to you as well. And yeah, so definitely. And even if the poems aren't about me, they're from, or everyone writes from their own perspective on things. Definitely, yeah.
And what I really liked about the poetry, and you mentioned that sort of briefly, you're working. It's a collaboration between the different forms.
So I've been doing more and more of it for the past year and a bit, I think now. It kind of, I mean, I think a lot of poets have collaborations between other art forms, like as part of their practice. But it's now something that I'm devoting like quite a lot of energy to. So working with I'm working with a musician at the moment on a sound piece that's kind of neither music nor poetry, but hopefully is a little bit of both. And that's kind of about PTSD and the quality of memory, and it's kind of we'll see what it ends up being, but yeah, it's definitely it's going to hopefully be like a really meaningful meeting point between both of our what we both do. And a big part of my life is film, because that's like where my day job usually is. At the moment it's a bit interesting, and maybe I will have to change
for interview coming later.
Yes. So film is so usually I'm producing film, especially artist film, which is also a whole other thing in itself, and assistant directing, so helping on set and running shoots and stuff. So so that's kind of, film is a highly collaborative art form anyway. You really need to work with lots of different people most of the time, and so it's so I've kind of directed a film that's being made and like finished at the moment, and I have all of these I have a lot of ambitions for making film poems. I mean, the problem is that the resources you require just for one, they're just so extreme, so you have to space them out quite a bit and make sure that try and get funding if you can is really important as well. So so I've never approached poetry. Well, I have approached poetry as just poetry, but it's never been the only thing in my life. So kind of embracing that rather than resisting that has been really important to me recently. It's like poetry informs every aspect of my life, even when I'm on set and I'm telling people what to do and it's this crazy shoot and I'm really stressed out. There'll be a moment where poetry will be really important to informing what I'm telling someone. So if an actor is asking for direction, for example, and poetry has taught me to like tear apart what normal words are and put them back in unexpected ways, and that makes people pay attention. I think in every aspect of what I do, poetry kind of manages to filter its way in. And I wouldn't want to speak for other poets, but I reckon that's what other poets find, is that even when they think that they've left poetry behind in some way, or if they're like on hiatus or they're feeling uninspired, it still manages to inform the way they see the world.
Amazing. I've never thought about it this way, because to me I'm reading the poetry, or I'm writing the poetry, and that's the bit I'm doing the poetry bit, and then that's my other stuff, and I never thought about this two words sort of like intersecting each other. So that's a completely new for me.
Poetry begins in the brain as well, which is what I was taught by at my time with the Barbican Young Poets, is that the poem begins here, and getting it from here to the page is a process, and it's really important, but it all starts kind of in your thoughts. So
no, that's very good, because I think lots of people are afraid of poetry because they don't know how to approach it. So the sort of even at school, when we learn how to about the poetry, it's usually talking about someone else's thoughts about something and trying to interpret them in a way that you want them to be interpreted, rather than sort of like letting it loose and say, this is okay, I know there's a poem about shoe, but it reminds you about something completely different. That's fine, go for it.
Totally. And it's important to recognize, well, I see coming from being in filmmaking quite a lot, where film is one of the least accessible art forms because there's so much you require resource wise. I think poetry to me seems like the most accessible art form, and a lot of people are surprised when I say that, but it is. It's something that you don't need a lot of you don't need any money to create it, and you can bring your own language to it. And it's really great that there are now poets widely accessible, that, you know, reflect lots of different voices, and that people, and lots of different ages as well, and people can kind of find them, especially in bookshops now. I mean, previously it was kind of more spoken word YouTube, which is still obviously there, but there's I think, you know, the publishing world is giving more and more opportunities, like, all the time, to all these different voices, and it's great. So it just kind of opens up what poetry is, and it seems obvious now that, you know, poetry has always been that, because it's existed in all these different ways throughout time. So yeah, it's but for, you know, people, school children now, there are so many more options, and I think the key thing is telling people that they're there and where to find them, what libraries they can get them from, and that, you know, this is also poetry, this is poetry, and also this is poetry, you know. Yeah,
the poetry is not just like one stiff bit of the sort of writing you find. It's so much more than that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But you do you have any particular ambitions? For example, do you want to produce your own poetry book and something? Is that something you would like to work towards as well? Because I know that not everyone wants to, not everyone does.
Yeah, so I have got this kind of manuscript that I mean, everyone's always kind of got a manuscript. Well, I don't know, but I think for a while I kind of thought that I could get away with just writing a selection of poems I thought were good, putting them together, and saying, this is it. There you go, publish it. And it doesn't. I think I'm glad that hasn't happened in that way, because not only have I rewritten a lot of those poems many times since since those points where I could have been published, but I think, you know, even if it's only 20 pages, it should kind of feel like a cohesive whole. So I mean, if you can, I mean, it's, some people don't, and they still have amazing collections, but if there's some kind of the poems are sort of speaking to each other, or there's a reason why they're all together, it does feel like, I don't know, I feel like it will be a more I'll be more proud of it. So that's the kind of manuscript I'm working towards at the moment, because I think it is important to have poetry on the page as well. For me, it's obviously not important for everyone, and if people's kind of performance discipline is the most important thing, that's great. I think that's so important, because that's how poetry began, and especially, you know, being a fan of Sappho, that's, you know, she probably didn't write, or if she did, you know, what we have written is not her writing, it's other people. Yeah. So but yeah, it's something that I'm definitely working on, and but who knows, there may be some aspect of it that's a little bit poetry plus something else, or I don't know, that's still open. So yeah,
this is amazing that in the current world you can actually have a lot of media engagement, so producing what it is actually a poem. So it's not just like, you know, writing, not just performing the poem, but quite a lot of outside bit as well. It creates a whole this venue of what the poetry is supposed to be about for you in that particular piece, which I find quite amazing. No, it's just I'm doing those interviews with everyone now. I'm preparing for this week of poetry in Wandsworth. I have been speaking to so many different people, and it's amazing me that so many different aspects of poetry I discovered that I wasn't really so much aware of. That if it's not even about styles, but it's about how people perceive poetry, and each of the people's doing it a completely different way, which is quite something that I'm hoping that more and more people will be able to discover, because it's just how you make it more accessible and not so stringent and available only for the, you know, chosen few.
Yeah, especially now, because oh God, who said it? I can't remember who said it, but it's not, poetry is not a luxury. I'm sure I can find the quote, but
if we find a quote, it'll be downstairs, down there.
It's not something that we kind of do because it's leisurely and nice. It's something that is kind of an important tool for dealing with the world and processing it and creating something new out of it that is kind of therefore a sort of dream of something different that happens in the world. I don't know. It's, yeah, I think, and especially at the moment where everything is so, I don't know, all of our structures have been broken down and people who've been told that there's a certain way of doing things and you can't do them any other way now saying, really? Because everything's like topsy-turvy at the moment. This is the time when poetry, which can be in any form and in any language, in any kind of dialect of a language, is just really vital, not just for the people writing it, but for, you know, audiences to hear and to read. Yeah. I don't know, and especially poems that can be very short. And if the internet is shortening, you know, abbreviating things, then poetry is a way of getting people's attention and telling them maybe things aren't quite so simple.
It's like a little chunk of poetry still matters, rather than sort of like I don't know, Iliad or something.
Yeah.
That equally important.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and even the Iliad was only performed in chunks, so they were quite long chunks still, but it would be like chunks of song that would go on for maybe 10 minutes and then they'd be over. So maybe half an hour. I don't know. Ask an Iliad scholar. I don't know. But yeah. So it's our even when you take an epic poem, it's still something that we can only process in little bits. So however little that bit is still fine.
No, that's important because it's I've never sort of thought about the poetry being like a little chunk because it's easy to digest. You know, so this, you know, it's so many different things I'm learning. So many different things I'm learning. Excellent. And if people wanted to hear more of you, interested in any projects you're taking part in, is there any good place they can find you on social media?
So on social media, on Twitter at Byford Poet, because my surname is Byford, and I'm trying to get the at Byford Twitter handle, but it's like somebody set up an account in 2009 and they haven't let go of it. So anyway, I've also got a website. Sorry, slight detail there. I've got a website, www.kmrbyford.com, and that's got kind of.
There shall be links, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, so that's kind of got what's going on with me and my news and stuff. And I'm on Instagram also, Byford Katie. Yeah. So yeah, I'm always up for, even if you don't really know me and you feel weird about reaching out. It's especially because I work in so many different art forms. I'm always talking to new people, and I really like making connections with new people that are doing different things. If they think that, you know, connecting will be something that could create a new collaboration, that's something that really interests me. So yeah, if anyone wants to reach out.
Collaborations are amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds great then. And yeah, it was lovely to reach out for you as well. So yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. It was great. Yeah.
Thank you very much for taking part. Right, so thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this little chat, and check out Katie and her poetry as well. And we'll see you soon for another piece of poetry. So take care and goodbye for now.
Bye.